The Mike Elko era officially gets underway. The 20th ranked Texas A&M Aggies welcome the 7th ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish. College game day is on hand, and all eyes in college football will be on Kyle Field as the Aggies and Fighting Irish do battle. And we're here previewing, predicting, breaking it all down, getting you ready for kickoff down in College Station. Guys, appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. He is Cole Thompson. I am Chris Phillips. We are rock and rolling here, breaking down this game, everything you need to know from College Station. Guys, make sure you like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check us out via podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us across all social media platforms, as well as our website, SECUnfiltered.com. Guys, this segment brought to you by our friends over at SeatGeek. Head over to SeatGeek.com and use promo code SECU for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's SeatGeek.com, promo code SECU to get $20 off today. The Mike Elko era begins in style as Texas A&M does battle against Notre Dame, a night game at Kyle Field, and a game that has college football playoff implications on this 2024 season and even beyond, and helping me break it all down as we preview, predict, and dive into the weeds of this ball game. Somebody who's a little bit familiar with Texas A&M, Cole Thompson. He joins me once again. Cole, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time.
One of the best games of college football begins week one. There's a reason why ESPN and College Game Day are making a trip over to College Station, because it's not only the start of the Mike Elko era, but this is a monumental game for both teams, no matter how you phrase it. At the end of the day, Texas A&M gets this win. It's a right step in the proper direction underneath the new head coach that I thought was the anchor of this team for years in the Jimbo Fisher era. But on the flip side, Notre Dame gets this win. At the end of the day, when you look at their schedule, this might be the thing that either prevails them going to the college football playoff or catapults them into the race of the dozen dance. So either way, this is the monumental game of the week. This is why we're talking about it. There's a reason why everyone in Aggie land and everyone up in South Bend, the Golden Domers versus the Aggies, two vastly underappreciated fan bases going toe-to-toe with each other at Kyle Field, only for next year for it to make the trip up to South Bend, Indiana.
Cole, of all the great matchups in week one, to your point, this is the premier game we are all looking forward to, and you and I get to talk about it. Kickoff on Saturday, August the 31st, a 7:30 p.m. Eastern time kickoff on ABC. Of course, like I mentioned, game being played in College Station at Kyle Field will be one of the best atmospheres in all of college football you see this season. A&M, a 2.5-point favorite, and they've been a favorite practically the entire offseason. What does it mean? We'll discuss. The over-under in this game set at 46.5. The series history, Notre Dame leads it 3-2 all time. The last meeting, Cole, these two teams have not met since 2001 when Texas A&M won that ball game 24-3. And like we mentioned, the number 7 ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, you can debate that ranking. Should they be preseason top 10? Maybe we can have that conversation. But there is no doubt this is a talented team that Marcus Freeman rolls into College Station. Went 10-3 a season ago. 8 starters are back, 3 on the offense, 5 on the defense. But it's also, Cole, what you added over the course of the offseason. Mike Denbrock, who engineered that thing in Baton Rouge, helped lead Jaden Daniels the Heisman Trophy. He takes over as your OC. You had Riley Leonard, Mike Elko's old quarterback from Duke. We'll talk more on that in a second. You look at the talent around him. Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, they'll feature them in the running game. Your wide receivers are a strength. They go 6-7 deep at that position. A big, big key. And again, Cole, something we'll dive into more here in just a second. You lose left tackle Charles Jagswa, I believe is how you say his last name. Either way, your left tackle gets hurt in fall camp, one of your best offensive linemen. And Cole, you even saw the spread in Vegas change when the news came out he would not play. So it's a massive blow to the offensive front. Notre Dame was already replacing 3 starters up front, including Joe Alt. So they got questions there. Defensively, one of the best units in college football last year. Howard Cross III, Riley Mills, Jordan Bahello back up front, Jack Kaiser, Drake Bowman man the linebacker spots, and then Benjamin Morrison is probably a name you've heard a lot if you're a fan of college football. One of the best corners in the game, and you also return All-American safety Xavier Watts. So, Cole, when you take a look, I say all that to say when you take a look at this Notre Dame team, again, you're somebody we don't just love SEC football, though we love it more than any other conference, but we love college football. Notre Dame's a team we've talked about a lot this offseason. When you look at the Fighting Irish, what do you see? What do you like with this top 10 group?
Yeah, I grew up a Notre Dame fan, so I know what Notre Dame football is all about. And when you think about last year's roster, they were physical. They won in the trenches. They added in that power with Audric Estime. They love to be able to push forward with guys like Blake Fisher and Joe Alt on the outside. But now you bring in Mike Denbrock, and now you bring in the finesse. So you still have that physical approach of what you have in the backfield with Jeremiah Love, who I think is going to be one of the best running backs in college football by the season's end. Just because he didn't break out last year doesn't mean that his welcome party is not going to be presented in 2024. But you bring in that finesse. We saw last season Jaden Daniels be able to sling it around the yard like no one's business. 2 standout wide receivers in Baton Rouge and Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, first-round picks. And you brought in some really good names at wide receiver this offseason. Chris Mitchell comes on over from Florida International. You bring over Jaden Harrison from Marshall. You still have Jaden Thomas. You still have Jaden Greenhouse. A lot of J's on this team, but also that can mean a lot of scores on this team as well. They love to spread it out deep. If you're hearing anything come out of camp from those that are on the boots on the ground, they're telling you exactly what you want to hear when it comes to the fly the football. They're not afraid to run it, but they certainly are going to spread you out wide. They're not going to be afraid to push it down the field. They're not going to be afraid to take some deep shots. And then on the flip side, Connor Weigman has got to be able to deliver if he wants to be the future heir apparent and probably the best quarterback that's walked through College Station since Johnny Manziel. But this is going to be one of the biggest tests for him because of what you have in that secondary. Benjamin Morrison is a first-round quarterback in the making. Xavier Watts is an All-American safety that's back for another year. There are going to be few teams that provide that level of consistency and that blanketed of coverage. It's like a fresh new pile of snow that just came over the Rocky Mountains on a cold December night. It's fresh, it's soft, but at the same time, if you hit one wrong crevice, it is game over. You are sinking. You are not going to be able to find your pathway back, and you are just going to have to accept defeat and wave the white flag. This is a major test for both sides of the football, but you talk about this Notre Dame team. On paper, they are built to be a college football playoff contender, but games are not won on paper. They're won on the gridiron, and that's ultimately going to be the biggest test for Riley Leonard and company as they make their way down to SEC country to really set the tone for what other teams like Louisville, like Florida State, like USC at the season's end, what they can expect against the Golden Domers.
Cole, as we break down this ball game, the Mike Elko era officially beginning, game 1 as head coach. In your mind, again, you're someone who's as familiar with Texas A&M as anybody. You covered the Aggies for a while. You've been around that program. You saw what it was under Jimbo Fisher, and you mentioned, and it's not the first time I've heard, when I heard you say that, you know, there were times, I think it was Dave that mentioned it to us, that there were times where Jimbo Fisher was kind of going off on his whatever planet he was on. It was Mike Elko that kind of, the way the offense and the defense, it was totally different. The way they operated, totally different. The way Mike Elko operates, I mean, he is the antithesis of Jimbo Fisher. My question is, what does that mean in game 1, right? Like, I don't doubt that the culture and the style and the identity of Texas A&M football isn't going to be vastly different. How much of that do we see in week 1, right? I mean, how much of that, like when you think about that, Mike Elko's first game, we expect it to look different. What specifically are you looking for that you think will look different for Texas A&M game 1 of Mike Elko versus the entire Jimbo Fisher era?
Well, you got to realize, C-Money, when you talk about this roster for years, A&M has had the premier talent. And it doesn't help when we get national pundits to come and boost their opinion and say, A&M's on the come up. We're going to put them at number 6 in the preseason poll. They should be able to compete with Alabama. They should be right there with Georgia. The team to beat in the SEC to watch for now, it's Texas A&M. And now we don't have to worry about the wagon being put before the horse. But the good news is the pieces are still there. Like, everyone wants to talk about how many names from that historic number 1 class in 2022 departed College Station for greener pastures. They still have a majority of those talents. They're unproven in some spots. Guys like Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy haven't been able to reach their full potential. Connor Weigman was on his pathway to become a really big household name before the foot injury last year. They still have the pieces in play, but they also now have a guy that feels like the strict babysitter that says 8 p.m. is bedtime. We're no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I am going to tell you how things are going to go, and we're not going to argue about it. And that's kind of what Mike Elko was. He was the anchor, and I don't mean to bring up Deadpool and Wolverine, but the anchor was one of the major points of that movie to save a universe. That was really the saving grace in College Station for years. Elko, top 10 defense, top 10 rushing attack, top 10 pass coverage, top 10 in scoring. There was a reason why when you still had Ross Bjork as the athletic director, they wanted to go defensive approach. They wanted to get back that same mentality that they had with R.C. Slocum when he had one of the best defenses in the Southwest Conference, when he had the wrecking crew, when he had that type of mentality that was physical approach, attack first, ask questions later. And I think that that's going to be where you see the biggest change from Jimbo Fisher to Mike Elko. A lot more buttoned up, a lot more pristine. The mental mistakes that we would watch against New Mexico or against a Appalachian State or UTSA in years past, in those games, you won't see that on game day. You may not be the best team on game day, but you will not have those mental, feeble, fundamental flaws that end up hurting you and allow teams to stick around when they probably shouldn't. And that's really where you have the blessing of a guy like Mike Elko coming back in. And it's a good fit. When people went back and they sometimes said, well, why did they go this pathway? What was the whole point of the Mark Stoops thing? What was the whole point of looking from the outside in? Sometimes just going back to the basics is the easiest path. Not everything has to be a 9-step formula to success. Sometimes point A to point B is not only the quickest pathway to get there, it's also the right way to get there. And that was Elko, a guy that did more with less during his time at Duke, a guy that was able to transcend Texas A&M's defense the second he arrived in College Station, and a guy that's been able to find success everywhere that he's been. It's the fact that the fundamentals, I think, will be an established pinpoint for Texas A&M success this year, where they may end up going 7-5, they may go 10-2, they may go 11-1 and surprise all the country, but they will be buttoned up and pristine. When you go face off against the Texas A&M roster, you will know that they are not going to give you opportunities the way they did back in 2021, 2022, and 2023.
And my question, Cole, to your point, because I do agree with you. Again, it's who Mike Elko is. It's what they'll be. Can it happen overnight? Because that's what you're asking in week one, right? They haven't played a game. Nobody's played a game. I know all reports out of Aggie land are positive, and I'm not trying to, I'm simply playing devil's advocate here, that I think that's the big question of how buttoned up are we in the very first game, or are there still things, again, from the Jimbo era we're trying to clean up? That being said, when you look at this game, Cole, on the field, and we talk about Mike Elko and his culture and what comes with it, really good defense. The guy's never had a bad defense. Nope. Defense is going to be a big calling card, for both sides in this ball game. Cole, that loss of the left tackle for Notre Dame could be significant. I know Riley Leonard, much more mobile. He's a mobile guy. He can get outside the pocket. But you and I have talked a lot about Nick Scorton this offseason and the type of player we think he's going to be. That matchup alone and how Notre Dame is able to, losing your left tackle in fall camp and you're replacing 3 starters from last year and your best offensive lineman, I think we'll be able to tell really, really early on if that's something that's going to hinder Notre Dame and slow them down, or maybe that's something they've slid a guy in there and they figured it out. But I think it's going to be very evident, and if they don't have an answer for Nick Scorton, it's going to be a really long night for that offense.
Let me just say a quick story. So I was there for the spring game this past year, the maroon and white, and you were watching Nick Scorton win battle after battle after battle after battle when it came to offensive tackles. He had 3 quote-unquote sacks in the game, and by the second quarter, it just felt like, they were telling him, hey, don't hit our quarterback. Don't even just tap him and call it a day because we don't need you killing somebody before we get there. Chris, that's not even the part of the story I'm trying to explain. The part is he's never played defensive end before. This is a guy that was an outside linebacker when he was at Bryant High School and an outside linebacker from the 2-point stand when he had the lead league in sacks in the Big Ten last year at Purdue. And he's doing this with very minimal reps at at left tackle. Not left tackle, at defensive end. So we're now talking about this guy absolutely putting together game after game after game. He's had rep after rep in practice. He's been one of the best overall players when it comes to finding success. If he ends up being as good as we think he can be, then what are we talking about? This might end up being one of, if not the most dominant defensive player in all the SEC for 2024. And this is a test. He's had the entire spring and the entire part of fall camp to master the craft of playing defensive end. And that's not even including other guys that we know about this defensive line, like Shamar Stewart, like Shamar Turner, Cassius Howell. Everyone's talking about him and what he brings. Solomon DeShields at linebacker. You also have Scooby Williams at linebacker coming on in from Florida. Torian York, who I thought was the most underappreciated player in the SEC last year defensively, because if he might have been a smaller size linebacker, but he played like he was 6'3". And so now you get those guys up front. Plus, you have a veteran secondary, which does have some question marks. I'm not going to sit here and deny it because of you did lose some players, but you also brought in some names that have experience playing, whether that be in the MAC, whether that be in Conference USA, whether that be in the SEC. You're allowing Bryce Anderson to move back to his natural safety position. All that aside, you're going to have issues if you're Riley Leonard. Not only are you going to have to run that RPO to a T to where you understand the passes have to get out pristine and direct. If not, I mean, honestly, you may see him on the ground more often than not. And it may be because of Nick Scorton is just winning battle after battle. And if that's the case, I mean, as good as Texas A&M and Notre Dame are supposed to be this year, one might end up winning the battle by the end of the second quarter.
It's definitely a matchup again to watch. And speaking of matchups to watch, Cole, let's go to the other side. This feels like a huge game for Connor Weigman. You know, with all the offseason chatter and talk, and you have Colin Klein in there as the OC. And I know A&M folks are really excited about that. You've got players around to help. Obviously, you lose Reuben Owens a couple weeks ago, but you've got Le'Veon Moss at the running back position. Wide receiver, it looks like the Aggies have the pieces. Offensive line should be better. It really does come down to QB1. And this battle between Connor Weigman and a really, really, really good Notre Dame defense from season ago. I'm excited to see those matchups on the outside. We mentioned Benjamin Morrison for Notre Dame, Xavier Watts. Again, the guys like Moose Muhammad for Texas A&M. The wide receiver room is really, really deep. You know, I think for the one game's not going to make or break this kid, but I think for the early momentum and the perception of what Connor Weigman is and what he can be, a game like this is important. And again, I don't want to put too much on this because it is game one of year one of Mike Elko. But for Connor Weigman coming back from the injury, we've talked a lot about, hey, if he's healthy, can be a top 5 quarterback in the SEC. He's got that kind of potential. If you're going to be that guy, it feels like to me, Cole, a game like this is when you show that.
I think the other part that's really important is they've had the entire spring of him being at least somewhat mobile, also the entire fall to be able to learn this offense. Something that we have to admit is right now, Colin Klein worked with mobile quarterbacks. He did when he was at Kansas State. It was a big reason why they were one of the top 25 ranked rushing attacks. It's why they were one of the top 30 ranked scoring offenses in the Big 12. And I get it. People are going to say Big 12 is different than the SEC, but scoring points is scoring points, regardless how you go ahead and get them. You still want to see that success. But everything I've heard from people around the area is that you're going to scheme up plays in Colin Klein's offense to get your balls to the playmakers. So who are the playmakers? Who's going to be that guy that steps up and is that security blanket on the outside when they're matched up against Benjamin Morrison? Is it a guy like Noah Thomas? Is it someone like Ja'Day Walker who stepped on up last season in place of Evan Stewart during the injury? When you lost Anaya Smith for a couple games, are you going to have that with Moose Muhammad? Are you going to feel that much more confident when you get back at Donovan Green at tight end? Many people don't remember this, but Jake Johnson, as good as a tight end as he was, really broke out last season because Donovan Green tore his ACL in training camp, and that was the go-to target across the middle of the field for Connor Weigman down the stretch. And so they already have a good relationship for 2021 or 2022. What if that now grows in 2024? You also brought in some young players like Ernest Campbell, Isaiah Williams. What if they break out? You know, they have lightning in a bottle speed. What if one of the new transfers comes in and they start making an impact? What if they start running 12 personnel the way they did back when they were in Manhattan, Kansas, and it's Trey Watson, the transfer from Fresno State? What if one of those guys ends up being that security blanket? And again, we know that Colin Klein is going to make sure that target after target after target goes to his playmakers. Because when the ball is in the best player's hands, it doesn't matter who is the defense you face off against. They will create separation. They will create anxiety. And more importantly, they will create matchups to where you're going to finally see double teams, slants towards a certain player. And that's going to open up the rest of the field. You don't need Ruben Owens to be your only bread and butter for this team to be successful. What you need is somebody to show you that they can be that security blanket, be that personnel, and be that guy that is going to always be the reliable target for Connor Weigman. And if that's the case, I mean, Chris, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Texas A&M has only had 2 Heisman Trophy winners. I'm not going to put the wagon before the horse. But if these two are seeing eye to eye and speaking the same language and Aggie dialect, we are talking about Weigman being a dark horse to make his way to New York City by the season's end.
And again, to your point, Cole, it's figuring all that out against a Notre Dame defense that was really, really good last year. I'm really curious to see, too, Cole, with both these offenses matching up, who's more successful in the quarterback run game? Like, which of the two quarterbacks? I think, for each defense, I think limiting that, keeping those quarterbacks within the pocket, not allowing those 3rd, 7, 3rd and 8 type of conversions. I mean, that's the thing in a game like this, I think, that makes one of the biggest differences. So I'm excited to see which defense is able to contain the other. That kind of leads me into, Cole, we talk about these quarterbacks. If there's anybody that knows how to do so, he knows everything about him. It's Mike Elko facing off against Riley Leonard, who was his quarterback last year. He went up against this guy every day. So when it comes to quarterbacks dueling off, quarterback run game, like I said, that's something I'm excited to see. You would feel like you'd give the nod to Elko there, potentially, with his knowledge of Riley Leonard's game.
It's not that I only give the nod to Elko because of the knowledge of the game. It's because of the way he knows how to scheme up quarterbacks such as Riley Leonard. When you were in practice, the one thing that you always want to do is make sure your defense is a little bit ahead of your offense before the start of training camp, because it's a lot easier for your offense when they go up against opposing defenses to really create opportunities for themselves and build off of relationships, bad performances, and make sure they don't make those same mental mistakes. For a defense, regardless of what offense you're seeing, you're playing the same type of mentality. You're playing the same type of consistency. So when your defense is able to scheme properly and eliminate big-time plays downfield, take away the rushing attack, or make a quarterback that's known for the mobility, not afraid to tuck and run, not afraid to pick up a few more yards with his legs, make him immobile behind the line of scrimmage, that takes away a major element and probably about a third of the playbook that Mike Denbrock wants to run. One of the things that we talk about so much is that last year, when you remember that game against Alabama, where LSU lost Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier came in, it wasn't that Nussmeier wasn't a bad quarterback. It was that they had to take out a good chunk of the playbook because they could not scheme him up because they're 2 variously different quarterbacks. So if you're able to do the same thing where you just make Riley Leonard have to throw the football, where they aren't able to run it, where he isn't able to go move up the field for a gain of 3, gain of 6, gain of 11, and then keep first downs alive, that already solves half the equation. And that's something that Elko has always been good at doing, finding a quarterback's strength and making it its main weakness.
Cole, it sounds somewhat crazy to say there's college football playoff implications on a ball game in week 1, but I think that is the case, right? When you talk about, obviously, Texas A&M getting off to a hot start, bolstering their resume with SEC play looming, but then Notre Dame, right, with being an independent, their schedule, they only have a couple opportunities to really stack up wins to hang their hat on, certainly going into College Station. Winning at Kyle Field will be one of those wins. That being said, Cole, let's dive into it. Our official predictions for the game. Game 1 for Mike Elko. We've all been talking about looking forward to this matchup all offseason. It's going to be one of the craziest environments in college football this season. The 12th man is going to show up, show out a really talented Notre Dame squad with aspirations of national championships, a Texas A&M squad who is the favorite, I might remind you, Cole, in this game. Did Vegas get it right, or does Notre Dame come in and get the upset win? The quote-unquote upset win, if you will.
Notre Dame has to win this game, in my opinion, to keep their college football playoff hopes alive if they are to go 10-2. Now, if they go 11-1, that's a whole different story. We already know that they can't get the first round bye because they don't play in a conference. But you have to realize that they have 2 other milestone games that might end up being blundering, baffling mistakes because of, I'm not sure I believe that much in USC, and I'm not sure I believe that much in Florida State this year. There's a ton of question marks surrounding those squads, but if you're 11-1 and your only loss comes to an A&M squad, you might be okay. If your only loss comes to a Florida State squad, you might be okay. 10-2, I don't think cuts it. So that's a major thing for Notre Dame fans to have to realize. And I think that there's something to be said about Kyle Field on a Saturday night with 103 screaming Aggies, where you know that the rafters shake. It is a cement cathedral of chaos, but that metal, you can feel the vibrations as the 12th man cheers on third down. And I think Nick Scorton is going to make a statement in this game. I think Nick Scorton finishes with 3.5 sacks. I think Nick Scorton is the SEC, if not the college football player of the week defensively. And I think Mike Elko bests his quarterback. I got 23-13 final score. Texas A&M starts off the Elko era on the right note and at 1-0.
Defense dominating the day. I do agree with you. I think it'll be a defensive ball game. I think we're going to see both defenses sort of rule the day, if you will. Again, I'm curious to see the quarterback run games and how each is utilized. I mean, again, it's a lot of new, right? I mean, Connor Weigman's got a new OC. Riley Leonard's brand new at Notre Dame. Both have weapons. Who's more well-equipped in week one to kind of hit the ground running? And then defensively, I think both are salty. The loss of the left tackle for Notre Dame, Charles Jagswa, I'm probably mispronouncing his last name, but that loss, to your point, is significant. Cole, I've said this all offseason long. I'm giving Texas A&M an opportunity to overachieve. I am. And as much talent as I can acknowledge A&M has, and as much differently this is going to be differently from Jimbo, and they show up in big games. A&M shows up in big games. It's the other ones they don't, right? They show up in these kind of games. 12th man will be rocking. It'll be crazy. I love the talent A&M's got on both sides of the football. I think A&M could, if they win this game, we're talking about A&M, at least I am, completely differently. A&M, I'm giving you the opportunity to overachieve and to prove me wrong. I think Vegas got it wrong. I think Notre Dame should be the road favorite here. I think the Fighting Irish, like you mentioned, Marcus Freeman, big year for Marcus Freeman. Their goal, college football player for bust, like you mentioned, to get there. They got to win this football game. I got Notre Dame edging out A&M 24-20. Again, asking a guy in game number one for everything to be flipped and then be buttoned up, ready to go to a point to be a legitimate, if you don't want to say they're top 10, a legitimate top 15 team with the talent they have. I think it's a big ask, even on the home field. So, listen, can A&M win the game, Cole? Absolutely they can win the game. I just want to see it. That's my mentality with A&M, right, wrong, or indifferent. I want to see it. They've got the pieces. I've also seen A&M fall flat on their face. That was Jimbo. I get it. But how much Jimbo is still left in the program? Can we be honest? Like, how much of it's still left? Mike Elko, what people don't see, he's fighting a battle behind closed doors to change the culture. And what people don't realize, you don't mend a broken culture overnight. It just doesn't happen. And you know what? If A&M wins, I'll eat my words and say, Mike Elko did more work than I realized he did over the last 10, 12 months or so. So, very winnable game. 12th man's going to be right. They're going to do everything they can to will their team to victory. But I am going to go Notre Dame 24-20 in a game I think the Fighting Irish have to have.
The only thing I will say is that you've already admitted that if Texas A&M wins this game, your opinion of A&M is going to drastically change. Mine isn't, but it's for the exact reason.
My ceiling of them will change. My opinion on their ceiling. But
my reason is the exact same, because I know they're going to show up for this game. I'm excited to see them show up for this game. I know A&M fans are going to be ravenous inside of Kyle Field for this game. But do you show up when you travel to Columbia, South Carolina? Do you show up when you have to face off against a Mississippi State? Do you show up in Arlington when you have to face off against an Arkansas? Because those are the games that we've seen in years past. A&M disappoints. They'll always be ready for the big showcase, but when it's against other teams, this is where the stench of Jimbo Fisher has to be mitigated completely.
So Cole's got the Aggies. I've got the Fighting Irish. What say you? Texas A&M, Notre Dame, the premier matchup of week one. Who comes out on top? Guys, appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check us out via podcast, wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us across all social media platforms, as well as our website, SECUnfiltered.com. For Cole Thompson, I'm Chris Phillips. Appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in, and we'll catch you on the other side.